He was the one who first noticed your absence and reported it. He and the cafe employee realized where you might have gone and contacted law enforcement together. Elizabeth made a mental note to thank Jason Miller at the first opportunity. Without his involvement in finding the bag and his concern for their well-being, they might not have found Amanda. As they left the interview room, they passed open doors where reunions were taking place. Emma was with her parents, Susan and Michael, who were expressing their emotions by hugging their daughter. Sophia was with her father, David. Her mother, Jane, had passed away several years ago, never knowing her daughter was alive. In the main hall of the station, Elizabeth saw Marilyn Clark and the Rodriguezes being informed of the sad news by police officers. Their grief contrasted with the overall atmosphere, reminding everyone that even in this moment of reunion, loss persisted. Amanda stopped, looking at them with tears in her eyes. "I wish I could help," she said softly. "Ashley, Katie, Olivia, they deserve to come home too." "You survived," John said gently. "You preserved the truth. Because of you, their stories will be told, and those responsible will be held accountable for their actions." Elizabeth held her daughter close, savoring the feeling of having her in her arms again after so long apart. The road ahead would be difficult. Amanda and the others would have to live with the aftermath of what they had experienced, and the family would have to learn to live, experiencing both the joy of Amanda's return and the awareness of what had happened to others. But now, in this moment, they were together. It was more than Elizabeth could have expected when she woke up that morning to the call from Detective Johnson. This part of their lives, which had remained uncertain for 2 decades, was finally coming to a close, giving way to what would come next. It was he who first noticed the disappearance and raised the alarm. Jason Miller, his name Elizabeth mentally added to the list of those she owed. Together with the cafe employee, they figured out where Amanda might have gone and immediately contacted the police. Without his vigilance and concern, without his help in finding the bag, they might never have found their daughter. As they left the interview room, they passed open doors where hugs and tears of joy reigned. Emma, with her parents, Susan and Michael, clung to them as if trying to make up for years of separation. Sophia, with her father, David, mourned her mother, Jane, who had died without knowing about her daughter's return. In the main hall of the station, Elizabeth saw Marilyn Clark and the Rodriguezes. Police officers were informing them of the tragic outcome. Their grief, their despair, contrasted sharply with the general joy, reminding everyone that even in this moment of reunion, the pain of loss was still present. Amanda stopped, her eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could help them. Ashley, Katie, Olivia. They deserve to come home too," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You survived," John said softly, hugging her. "You preserved the truth. Thanks to you, their stories will be heard, and those responsible will answer for their crimes." Elizabeth hugged her daughter, enjoying the feeling of warmth and security after a long separation. The road ahead was long and difficult. Amanda, like the others, would have to live through the consequences of what she had experienced, and the family would have to learn to live with this new reality, combining the joy of return with the pain of losing others. But now, at this very moment, they were together. This was more than Elizabeth could have hoped for when Detective Johnson called her that morning. 2 decades of uncertainty were finally coming to an end, giving way to a new beginning. In 1995, in Arizona, the entire team of Young cheerleaders disappeared without a trace after the performance. 20 years later, a tourist finds something shocking in the desert that will turn everything upside down and reveal the terrible truth. The Arizona sun generously flooded the kitchen with light, casting rectangles on the dining table where Evelyn Smith and her husband, James, were sitting. It was a typical morning in Phoenix, or at least as typical as the mornings of the last 20 years could be. Ever since their twin daughters went missing, Evelyn had absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, her thoughts, as always, drifting to Betsy and Haley. They would have been 34 by now. What would they look like? Would they have their own children? These questions, like prickly thorns, tormented her soul daily, although she had learned to live with this inevitable uncertainty. The sudden vibration of the phone, echoing across the surface of the wooden table, struck her like a thunderbolt. She glanced at the screen, expecting to see the name of a colleague or perhaps someone from the bereavement support group. But instead, her heart froze. Detective Miller's name appeared on the display. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's Detective Miller." James, engrossed in reading the newspaper, looked up, his eyes widened in amazement. Detective Miller was the man who had been in charge of the investigation into their daughter's disappearance, a case that, despite extensive press coverage and a large-scale search, remained unsolved, buried under the weight of years gone by. "Answer it," James urged, his hand trembling as he placed his coffee mug on the table. Evelyn swiped across the screen, accepting the call, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello." Detective Miller's deep voice echoed through the phone. "Mrs. Smith, I hope I'm not disturbing you this morning?" "Not at all," Evelyn replied, putting the call on speaker so James could hear too. "Is something wrong?" "We have an important update on your daughter's case," the detective said, his tone even, but with an underlying anxiety that made Evelyn's stomach clench. "What kind of update?" she whispered, her voice betraying her. After 20 years of silence, any news seemed impossible. "Have you found her?" Evelyn blurted out. "I can't explain everything over the phone," Detective Miller interrupted gently. "Could you and your husband come down to the station? The sooner the better." James leaned towards the phone. "We'll be there immediately," he assured the detective. "Thank you." "I'll be waiting." The call ended, plunging the kitchen into oppressive silence. For a moment, they both froze, as if afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile moment of hope. "What do you think?" Evelyn couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the hope that, like a weed, was growing in her soul. James reached across the table and squeezed her hand in his. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but whatever happens, we'll get through it together." They rose from the table, as if charged with an unknown energy, leaving their unfinished breakfast behind. Evelyn grabbed her purse, James his wallet, and keys. 5 minutes later, they were pulling out of the driveway. The morning sun caressed the car as they drove to the Phoenix Police Department. "It's been so long," Evelyn whispered, staring out the window at the city that had changed so much in those 20 years. New buildings, expanded highways, a place their daughter wouldn't even recognize. "I never thought we'd hear from Detective Miller again," she added. James nodded, his fingers white as he gripped the steering wheel. "I know. I've tried to move on, but a part of me has always been waiting for this call." The police station parking lot seemed more crowded than usual today. As they parked, Evelyn recognized familiar cars belonging to other parents of missing cheerleaders. Her heart pounded. "They're here too," she whispered, her voice trembling. Inside the station, they were met with the familiar smell of coffee and bleach. The receptionist, recognizing them, gave a sympathetic smile and directed them to a conference room at the end of the hall. Entering, they saw 4 other parents already seated around a large table. Detective Miller stood at the head, his once dark hair now streaked with gray, the lines around his eyes deeper than Evelyn remembered. "Mr. and Mrs. Smith," he nodded, acknowledging them. "Please, have a seat." As they took the remaining seats, Evelyn exchanged glances with the other parents. Sarah and John Wilson, whose daughter Emma had disappeared along with the twins. Jennifer and Brian Brown, parents of Sophia. Deborah Brooks, mother of Ashley, and Daniel and Jessica Rodriguez, parents of Olivia, all of them bound by one terrible event, one nightmare that had stretched on for 2 decades. Detective Miller cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming so quickly. As I mentioned on the phone, we have an important development in your daughter's case." He paused, his face solemn. "Early this morning, a hiker in the Mojave Desert discovered something that we believe is connected to your daughter's disappearance." He turned to a laptop and clicked a few keys. On the screen, projected onto the wall, an image appeared. A rusty metal suitcase, partially buried in the sand beneath a huge flat rock. The lid was open, revealing a pile of red and white fabric. "Cheerleading uniforms," Deborah Brooks whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. Evelyn leaned forward, trying to make out the details in the photograph. The red fabric, though dusty and faded, was unmistakable, identical to the uniform her daughter had worn the night they disappeared. Detective Miller continued. The hiker, traveling with his loyal dog, made an unexpected discovery. They ventured into lands far from the beaten tourist tracks, where few people have ever set foot. The dog, keenly sensing a scent, began to dig. It was then that the suitcase was discovered. Where exactly was this? James's voice, despite the underlying turmoil, remained steady. Evelyn could see the storm of emotions in his eyes. Approximately 30 miles outside of Phoenix, in a remote, desolate area. The detective clicked on the screen, displaying a panoramic shot, an endless, lifeless expanse surrounding the discovery site. "We've already dispatched a forensic team to the location." "We need to go there," Evelyn stated firmly, surprised by her own resolve. "I have to see it with my own eyes." The other parents nodded in unison, supporting her. Detective Miller frowned. "There's no need for that. We'll take the suitcase and its contents to the lab for analysis." "Please," Linda Thompson pleaded. "After 20 years of agonizing ignorance, we need to see it." The detective scanned their faces, then sighed. "I need to contact the field team." He left the room, holding the phone to his ear. While he was gone, the parents whispered, sharing speculations. Evelyn could barely focus on their words. Her mind was racing with theories. This suitcase appeared there recently. Why now, after all these years? Detective Miller returned a few minutes later. "The field team is allowing you to come, but under the condition that you follow protocol. Stay behind the tape, don't touch anything, and follow the instructions of the personnel on site." Relief washed over Evelyn. "Thank you." "We'll go with you," James added. The detective nodded. "We leave in 15 minutes. The drive will take about an hour." As Evelyn left the conference room, she felt a strange mix of fear and hope. 20 years of tormenting doubts might finally come to an end. She squeezed James's hand as they headed toward the car, silently reminding each other that whatever awaited them, they would face it together. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as the convoy of cars left Phoenix. Ahead, like a harbinger of tragedy, was Detective Miller's unmarked police car. Behind it, a string of 5 civilian vehicles carried the parents whose hearts were breaking with an unspoken plea for truth. Evelyn stared out the window as the cityscape slowly gave way to the vast desert. Her mind raced back to that nightmarish night when her daughters disappeared. The regional cheerleading competition. Betsy and Haley, 14 years old, full of life, had performed brilliantly with their team. The girls had called home, overjoyed with their second-place finish. They promised to call again as soon as they started on their way back. But that call never came. By the time the convoy reached the desolate location, the sun was at its zenith, casting harsh shadows on the rugged terrain. The cars stopped in a makeshift parking area, next to several police vehicles. Silently, step by step, the parents followed Detective Miller, walking almost half a mile across the packed earth. Ahead, surrounded by yellow tape, stood a white tent, a grim witness to what had happened. Several officers and forensic experts were methodically examining the area. As Evelyn approached, she noticed a man standing to the side, with a medium-sized dog on a leash, the same hiker who had made the terrible discovery. Detective Miller pointed him out. "This is Jason Miller, the man who found the suitcase, and this is his dog, Skippy." Jason stepped forward, extending his hand. He was about 40, with weathered skin and kind eyes that held a hint of sadness. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances," he said, shaking hands with each of the parents. Evelyn, fighting back tears, managed to say, "Thank you for finding this. You have no idea what it means to us." Jason nodded, his face expressing sympathy. "Skippy deserves most of the credit. He caught a scent and wouldn't leave it alone, started digging like crazy. The dog, an Australian Labradoodle with intelligent eyes, sat obediently at his owner's feet." "Can we see it?" James asked, looking hopefully toward the tent. Detective Miller led them to the awning, where the suitcase sat on a folding table. Even from a distance, Evelyn recognized the red and white fabric of the cheerleading uniform, neatly folded, but already touched by time and the elements. The forensic expert began his explanation. "We believe the burial occurred quite recently," the detective stated, "possibly within the last year." "Recently?" Peter Rivera asked, his voice trembling. "But our daughters disappeared 20 years ago." "That's what makes the discovery so strange," Detective Miller nodded. "Whoever hid the bodies acted in haste. The burial was shallow, the stones on top weren't very heavy, as if they expected no one would dare to go so far into the wasteland." The parents, leaning over the table, peered at the evidence, hoping it would finally lead them to their daughters. At that moment, Evelyn noticed movement in the distance. Cars were approaching. One was a news van, emblazoned with the logo of a local television station. The second was a sedan, achingly familiar. As the sedan stopped, the driver got out, and Evelyn was overcome with a strange sense of recognition. It was Harold Baker, the girls' former cheerleading coach. He walked with a determined stride, even though he had aged since she had last seen him. The gray had begun to touch the once dark hair, but his athletic build and confident stride remained unchanged. "Evelyn James," he called out, approaching them. "I heard and came right away." Detective Miller stepped forward to greet Baker, extending his hand. "Coach, thank you for responding so quickly." Baker gave the detective a firm handshake. "Of course, when it comes to my girls, I drop everything." Evelyn noted to herself that he still referred to the cheerleaders as his girls, even after 2 decades. Baker had been deeply involved in the search, using his connections and resources to support the investigation, even when the police began to scale back their efforts. "We've decided to release this discovery to the media," Detective Miller explained to the assembled parents. "This case touched our entire community 20 years ago. Hundreds of volunteers participated in the search operations. People need to know that we've found something." Evelyn watched as reporters began setting up equipment nearby. A young woman with a microphone was already speaking with one of the officers, nodding attentively at every word. Harold Baker stood frozen by the table, gazing at the familiar uniform. His face was unreadable, like a mask. "After all these years," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I never lost hope that we would find them." He turned to Jason Miller, who was still standing at the edge of the tent, next to his loyal dog. "Thank you," Baker said sincerely, extending his hand to the officer. "Your discovery may finally give us the answers we've been searching for." Then he moved among the parents, greeting each with a warm handshake or a light touch on the shoulder, trying to convey his support and sympathy. When his gaze landed on Evelyn and James, his eyes softened. "It's been a long time," he said quietly. "How are you holding up?" James replied with quiet resolve. "As well as can be expected." "We heard you're no longer working at the school," Evelyn remarked, trying to distract herself from the rush of emotions. Baker nodded, smiling slightly. I left the school system about 10 years ago, but I still coach cheerleaders, started my own program. It helps keep me busy. Before they could continue their conversation, a camera crew approached them, a reporter, a cameraman, and an assistant. We'd like to interview the parents, if that's all right, the reporter said to Detective Miller. The detective nodded in agreement. Please, one at a time, and try to be brief. The interviews began. Each parent, struggling to contain their emotions, expressed their renewed hope that this discovery would lead to finding their daughters, or, at least, to understanding what happened to them. Evelyn watched as Sarah broke down in tears while speaking about her daughter, Rachel. When it was their turn, Evelyn and James stood before the camera, holding hands as if seeking support from each other. Mrs. Smith, how are you feeling about this new lead after 20 years? The reporter asked, her voice full of empathy. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. It's overwhelming. We've never stopped looking for our daughters, never lost hope. If Betsy and Haley are out there, if they can see this broadcast, we want them to know we're still looking. We'll never stop looking for you. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. Mr. Smith, what are you hoping for with this discovery? James's voice was steady, but Evelyn felt his hand tremble in hers. At least closure. But what we're really hoping for is what every parent in our situation hopes for, to find our children alive and bring them home. He glanced at his wife, squeezing her hand tighter. After the interview, Evelyn realized she had left her water bottle and camera in the car. She sighed, feeling weary, but a flicker of hope remained in her heart. I need to go get them, Evelyn said resolutely, turning to James. I want to capture this place with my good camera. The phone just won't do it justice. I'll come with you, James immediately offered, not wanting to leave her alone. They approached Detective Miller to inform him of their intentions. The detective nodded, frowning slightly. All right, but stick to the path you came in on. It's easy to get lost out here, and we have enough missing persons for one day. They nodded in agreement and headed back toward the parking area. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and waves of heat rose visibly from the scorching sand. Evelyn greedily absorbed the surrounding landscape, sensing the boundlessness of the desert. Suddenly, something caught her eye on the horizon. A truck, partially hidden behind a sand dune, and two figures bustling around it. One was straining, pulling something heavy toward the vehicle, while the other was crouched behind a large cactus near some rocks. James, Evelyn whispered, touching his arm to stop him. Look over there. James followed her gaze. I see them, and there's someone in the truck. What are they doing here? Evelyn wondered aloud, frowning. It's too far from any tourist trails. James squinted against the sun. Probably just taking a break after some off-roading or something. Evelyn shook her head, her intuition telling her something was wrong. Why would anyone haul a heavy bag if they're just taking a break? And what's that other person doing near those rocks? Without waiting for James to answer, she abruptly changed direction, heading toward the truck. Evelyn, James exclaimed, hurrying to catch up with her. What are you doing? The detective said to stay on the road. I just want to see what's going on, she replied, quickening her pace. Something tells me this isn't right. James caught up to her, gently grabbing her arm. This is dangerous. We should tell Detective Miller about it. By the time we get back to him, they could be gone, Evelyn countered, pulling away. I need to know if this has anything to do with our daughters. As they got closer, the men by the truck noticed them. Evelyn raised her hand in greeting, calling out, Hello! The shout hung in the air, instantly triggering chaos and alarm. As if on cue, the men yelled to each other, abandoning whatever they were doing. The one who had been carrying the bag tossed it into the truck bed in a flash. The second man, who had been near the rocks, grabbed something resembling a shovel and rushed toward the vehicle. Within seconds, all three were inside the truck. The engine roared to life, and the truck sped away in a cloud of dust. "Did you see that?" Evelyn gasped, her voice trembling. "They ran." In the last moments before the truck disappeared from sight, Evelyn managed to catch a glimpse of a small sticker on the rear window, some kind of company logo. Instinctively, she grabbed her phone, trying to take a picture, but the truck was moving too fast, too far away. The resulting image was just a blur. There was a company logo on the back window, she repeated to James, her heart pounding. "Did you see it?" James nodded grimly. "I saw it, but I didn't recognize it." A moment of silence hung in the air as they both stared at the dust trail left by the vanishing truck. Then, driven by curiosity and a mother's intuition, Evelyn headed toward the spot where the men had been. "Evelyn, we need to go back," James urged, reluctantly following her. "We're far outside the safety zone." "Just a little longer," she insisted, the resolve in her voice sounding like steel. "I need to see what they were doing." When they reached a large cactus and the nearby rocks, Evelyn knelt down, examining the ground. There, right by the rocks, was a freshly dug hole, suspiciously similar to the one where they had found the suitcase. James joined her, carefully studying the disturbed earth. "There's something here," he whispered suddenly, reaching into the sand. He pulled out a small object, blowing away the dust that covered it. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, James, it's Haley's earring!" With trembling fingers, she took the small piece of jewelry from his palm. Even though the earring was tarnished and corroded from years in the desert, there was no mistaking its design. A tiny silver star with a red gemstone in the center. She had bought matching pairs for both twins on their 13th birthday, just months before they disappeared. "Are you sure?" James's voice was barely audible. Evelyn nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sure. I gave them to them for their birthday." She looked at him, hope and fear mingled in her gaze. "James, those men, they have to know something about what happened to our girls." They searched the surrounding area thoroughly, hoping to find any other clues, but the men seemed to have been very careful, trying to conceal anything that might give them away. With the earring clutched tightly in her hand, Evelyn finally agreed to return to the investigation site. "We need to tell Detective Miller about this immediately," she said as they walked back. "Those men could be the key to finding our daughters." When they returned to the tent, Detective Miller was busy talking to a forensic technician. The other parents were nearby, some talking to law enforcement officials, others watching the ongoing investigation intently. Evelyn called out to them as they approached. "We need to talk to you urgently." Detective Miller excused himself from the technician and turned to them, his face etched with concern. Seeing their expressions, he asked, "What is it? What's happened?" "We found something," James explained, gesturing for Evelyn to show the earring. She held out her hand, displaying the jewelry. "This is an earring like the ones Haley wore. I'm sure of it. I gave matching pairs to both girls for their 13th birthday." The detective frowned, taking the earring to examine it more closely. "Where did you find this?" Evelyn and James exchanged glances before James answered, "About half a mile from here. We saw 3 men near a truck. One was carrying what looked like a heavy sack, and another was digging near the rocks." "They left when they spotted us," Evelyn added quickly. "We went over to where they were digging and found the earring in the sand." Detective Miller's frown deepened. "You followed 3 unknown men to a remote location. Do you realize the potential risks?" "We understand," James admitted, "but we couldn't just let them go without checking." "It's likely they're connected to what's happening," Evelyn stated firmly. "They might have been checking something after learning the police have been here all morning, perhaps getting rid of other items." By this time, the other parents had gathered around, listening intently to the conversation. Vincent Carraway pushed his way through the small crowd, his expression focused. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from Evelyn to the Detective. Detective Miller held up the earring. The Smiths found this near where they saw 3 men acting suspiciously. Mrs. Smith believes it may belong to her daughter, Haley. Carraway's eyes widened slightly as he looked at the jewelry. It does look like the earrings the girls were wearing. Did you get a good look at these men? Detective Miller asked, turning back to Evelyn and James. Could you identify them if you saw them again? It was hard to make out their faces, but I think I remember some details of their appearance and clothing, James admitted. I did notice a company emblem on the back window of the vehicle. An emblem? The detective opened his notebook. Do you recall it? Evelyn shook her head. Not exactly, but I took a picture. She took out her phone and showed him a blurry image. I don't think this will help much. Could you draw what you remember? Detective Miller asked, handing her the notebook and a pen. Evelyn took them hesitantly. I'm no artist, but I'll try. She began to sketch, her brow furrowed as she tried to recreate the emblem she'd glimpsed on the car window. After a minute, she handed the notebook back. It was something like this, a stylized bird, maybe a phoenix, with its wings spread around 3 letters, C, P, and F. Linda Thompson, who had been listening silently, suddenly stepped forward. CPF, that sounds like Carraway Performance and Fitness. All eyes turned to Vincent Carraway, whose expression remained calm. Carraway Performance and Fitness, Detective Miller repeated, looking questioningly at the coach. Evelyn felt a surge of excitement. Could that company have something to do with what happened? Carraway raised his hands in a defensive gesture. My company partnered with one of the teams, and we supported the search efforts. We provided all necessary information. That's correct, Detective Miller confirmed, addressing the parents. Coach Carraway's company was thoroughly investigated during the initial investigation. They provided financial support and volunteers when the official search was concluded. Did you happen to notice the license plate of the vehicle? He asked Evelyn and James. No, James replied. At least, we didn't see it. No plate? The detective made a note. That could be an important detail. Michael Lee, Hannah's father, also attempted to sketch the emblem. He held up his drawing. Would it look something like this? He asked Evelyn. His sketch showed a stylized bird with outstretched wings surrounding the letters CPF in bold print. It was very similar to what Evelyn had been trying to describe. Yes, she confirmed. Very similar. Yes, there is certainly a resemblance to the logo of my former company, Carraway said, examining the image. However, as I mentioned, I sold that company 20 years ago, before the events we're discussing now. Sold? Detective Miller asked, raising his eyebrows. To whom? To a businessman named Kenneth Smith, Carraway replied. He kept me on as a consultant for a while, so the company was associated with me during some procedures, but I've had no official ties to CPF for nearly 2 decades. Detective Miller made another note. I'll need the details of that transaction and Mr. Smith's current contact information. Of course, Carraway replied. Anything that can help with the investigation. In the meantime, the detective continued, turning to Evelyn and James. Can you show us the exact location where you saw these men and found the item? Yes, James said. It's not far from here. I'd like to check for any tracks, Detective Miller explained. If they left, there might be tire tracks we can examine. Evelyn nodded. I suppose so. The road they took isn't used very often. The tracks might still be visible. The detective considered this, then nodded. I'll send a team to examine the area and look for any tracks. You two should stay here or return to the station. It might not be safe. We understand, James said, though Evelyn looked like she wanted to argue. But we'd like to at least observe from a distance. After a slight pause, Detective Miller conceded. You can wait at our base, but no further than that. I mean it, he added, looking intently at them. No more going off on your own. While the detective gathered a small team to investigate the site, Jason Miller approached with his dog, Skippy. "I know this area well," he offered. "I could help your team." Detective Miller shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Miller, but we can't risk involving civilians at this stage." The tourist nodded understandingly. "Of course, just wanted to offer." Evelyn reached out to touch his arm. "Thank you anyway, and thank you again for finding the item. Without you and Skippy, we might not have made this much progress." Jason smiled gently. "Glad to be of help." Evelyn Smith reached across the table to support her companion. "I understand your concern, believe me, but traveling alone into remote areas won't help Betsy and Haley. It could complicate things." The waitress returned with their orders, carefully placing the plates. "Here you go. Anything else?" "No, thank you," James replied, expressing his gratitude. As the waitress adjusted a strand of hair, Evelyn noticed a glint on her earlobe. It was an earring, a small star with a stone in the center. A similar earring had been found in the remote area. A similar earring Evelyn had given her daughters on their 13th birthdays. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her voice calm. "That earring you're wearing? May I ask where you got it?" The waitress seemed surprised by the question, but didn't appear alarmed. She touched the earring. "This old thing? A customer gave it to me years ago. Said it matched my eyes." She smiled, reminiscing. "It doesn't have a match, though. The man said he lost the other one but let me keep it if I wanted." James, who had followed Evelyn's gaze, was now looking at the earring with the same recognition. "Is this customer local?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The waitress pondered. "I don't know if he lives here, but I've seen him from time to time over the years. He's very polite, always leaves a generous tip." She pointed to a bulletin board on the wall behind them, covered in photos. "He's on our customer wall somewhere." "Thank you," Evelyn replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your earring is very pretty." With a smile and a nod, the waitress went to attend to other customers. James and Evelyn turned to examine the photos on the wall, searching for a face that might match what they had seen in the remote area. The wall was covered with dozens of photos. Tourists posing with staff, locals celebrating events, drivers stopping for lunch during long trips. "This might sound unusual, but please hear me out." The waitress set down a coffee pot, her expression curious. "Is something wrong with the order?" "No, everything's fine," Evelyn assured her. "It's about your earring." James shot her a look, but Evelyn pressed on. "I found the match to your earring in a specific location this morning," she explained, watching the waitress's face carefully. "That earring belonged to my daughter, who disappeared 20 years ago, along with other girls from her group." The waitress's hand instinctively went to her earring, her eyes widening. I don't understand." "Law enforcement found items related to their activities in the location where they disappeared," James added gently. "And then Evelyn found an earring identical to yours in another location nearby where searches were conducted." The waitress froze, looking from one to the other as if trying to comprehend what was happening. "You're suggesting? You think this earring is connected to your daughter's disappearance?" "I know it sounds unbelievable," Evelyn admitted, "but these earrings were a matching pair. I gave them to my daughter for her birthday shortly before she disappeared." "The likelihood that you happen to have a completely similar earring—" She didn't finish the sentence. The waitress sat down in an empty seat next to James, her face paling. "The man who gave it to me, I had no idea." She paused, deep in thought. "Do you remember who gave it to you?" James asked gently. She nodded slowly. "I can't remember his name, but he's been here a few times over the years, though not so much lately. He's a friend of Walter Henderson, who lives on a ranch about 10 miles from here." "Walter Henderson?" Evelyn repeated, committing the name to memory. "He's a customer who orders takeout," the waitress explained. The diner delivers food to his ranch every day. In fact, she glanced at the clock. I should be making his delivery in about 20 minutes. Evelyn and James exchanged meaningful glances. I'm not sure if I can help you, the waitress said, her voice a little quiet. Giving out information about other people could get me into trouble, and finding a job these days isn't easy. We understand, Evelyn replied. But if these people have information about our daughters, about what happened to them, wouldn't you want to help? The waitress considered this for a moment, then made her decision. I can't give you his contact information directly, but I'm scheduled to deliver his order in 20 minutes. If you happen to be heading in the same direction, well, I can't control who drives where, can I? Evelyn felt a surge of relief. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to us. Just promise me something, the waitress said, rising. If anything happens, don't mention my name. This is the only job I have. We promise, James said solemnly. The waitress nodded and returned to the kitchen, leaving Evelyn and James to finish their meal and pay the bill. As they walked out to their car, James noticed a familiar figure at the gas station across the street. The man they knew was filling the tank of his pickup truck, while his companion watched from the passenger seat. Before they could approach him, the side door of the diner opened, and the waitress emerged, loading several large bags into the back of a small delivery motorcycle. She glanced at Evelyn, then looked away as she secured the bags and mounted the bike. Let's go, Evelyn said, getting into the passenger seat. James started the engine and waited for the waitress to pull onto the road before following at a discreet distance. They drove in tense silence, the landscape monotonous and barren. After about 15 minutes, the waitress turned onto a dirt road marked by a faded wooden sign that read, Henderson Ranch, Private Property. James drove past the turnoff, then pulled onto the shoulder as they disappeared from view. What now? He asked. We wait for her to leave, then drive up to the gate, Evelyn decided. We would like to ask Mr. Walter Henderson about his acquaintance Harold Baker, who reportedly handed off an item to the waitress, Haley. This may not be easy, Evelyn. It might be worth reconsidering this approach. Maybe we should just observe today. At least we know where his property is, and we can share that information with the appropriate authorities. They turned around and parked on a small rise overlooking the entrance to the property, out of plain sight. The property was surrounded by a tall iron fence, with surveillance cameras mounted on the gateposts. Beyond the fence they could see several buildings, a large main house, a couple of smaller structures that could be guest houses, and what appeared to be stables in the distance. The waitress parked her motorcycle at the gate and handed over the catering order to a security guard. The size of the delivery suggested it was for a large gathering, far more than a single ranch owner would need. Does any ranch really require catering for that many people on a daily basis? James wondered. Maybe he has a lot of employees, Evelyn suggested, though she shared his doubts that anything was typical about Henderson's property. After a few minutes, the waitress collected the empty delivery bags and got back on her motorcycle. They watched her drive away, disappearing in a cloud of dust on the dirt road. Should we contact Detective Miller? James asked, his hand reaching for his phone. Evelyn considered it. We don't have any concrete evidence that Mr. Henderson is involved in any disappearances. Just a series of coincidences. I'm not sure the detective would immediately launch an investigation based on that alone. As they discussed their next move, the ranch gates creaked open and a blue SUV emerged. Inside were 3 men. Evelyn recognized them instantly by their clothing and headwear. They were the same men they had seen earlier. It's them, she whispered, ducking down. Suddenly, Evelyn sank into her seat. James tensed as the SUV approached them, passed their car, and pulled onto the main road. For a split second, as the vehicles passed each other, Evelyn made eye contact with one of the men in the back seat. They seem to notice us, she whispered, feeling her heart pound. We need to leave immediately. James started the engine and pulled back onto the road, heading away from the ranch. In the rearview mirror, he saw the SUV slow down, then make a U-turn to follow them. "They're coming after us," he said, his voice tight with apprehension. Evelyn twisted in her seat to look back. An SUV was gaining speed, clearly intending to catch up to them. "Step on it." James pressed the accelerator, but their car was no match for the SUV on the rough desert road. Within minutes, the SUV had caught up and pulled in front of them, forcing James to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. The doors of the SUV swung open, and 3 men emerged. Simultaneously, 2 more vehicles sped out of the ranch gates in the distance, racing towards them. "James," Evelyn breathed, fear gripping her. "What do we do?" But it was too late to retreat. The men surrounded their car, one of them gesturing for them to lower the windows. "Get out of the car," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. Having no other choice, Evelyn and James complied, stepping out into the harsh desert air with their hands raised. "Who are you, and why were you surveilling the ranch?" another man demanded. Evelyn straightened her shoulders, finding courage in the face of their predicament. "My name is Evelyn Smith. This is my husband, James. We're looking for information about the disappearance of our daughters many years ago. We have reason to believe someone at this ranch may have information we need." The men exchanged glances. Then, the first man spoke into a radio attached to his shirt. "We have a couple from the desert. They claim to be looking for missing persons. Stand by for instructions." A moment later, static crackled over the radio. "Bring them in." Surrounded by the men, and with no means of resistance, Evelyn and James were escorted into one of the newly arrived cars and driven through the gates of the Mojave Ranch. Their search for information had led them directly to the source, and Evelyn couldn't decide whether to feel alarmed or hopeful at the prospect of finally learning the truth about what happened to their daughters. The interior of the Mojave Ranch was strikingly manicured, with immaculate lawns surrounding the main house and meticulously designed flower beds lining the driveway. It looked like any other country estate for wealthy people, serene and orderly, with no hint of the sinister secrets Evelyn suspected lay beneath the surface. They were led into the main house through a side entrance and down a hallway adorned with artwork. The men ushered them into an empty room that appeared to be a study, with bookshelves lining one wall and a large desk dominating the space. Windows offered a view of distant mountains, the beauty of the landscape a stark contrast to the unease Evelyn felt. "Wait here," one of the men instructed before conducting a cursory search and confiscating their personal belongings, including their phones, wallets, and car keys. Then, without another word, they left the room and locked the door behind them. James immediately tested the door, but it was indeed locked. "They've locked us in," he said, his voice laced with anxiety. "We should have contacted Detective Miller." "Too late now," Evelyn replied, scanning the room for anything that might help them. The desk drawers were locked, and there was nothing within reach that could serve as a tool of any kind. "What do they want from us?" James wondered, pacing nervously. "If they're involved in the disappearance, why not just get rid of us?" Evelyn shook her head. "I don't know, but they must have a reason." They fell silent as they heard footsteps approaching the door. It opened to reveal a stocky man in his late 60s, dressed in an expensive suit despite the heat. His gray hair was neatly combed, and a costly watch adorned his wrist, signaling wealth and status. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he greeted them, his voice smooth and cultivated. "I'm Walter Henderson. I understand you've been wanting to meet me." "Where are our daughters?" Evelyn demanded, stepping forward. "Please, have you seen them?" Henderson raised an eyebrow, seemingly unfazed by her directness. "I understand, but I'm curious. What brings a senior couple to roam the property? My security reported that you were in a restricted area, observing the activity. Now, you're here. Could you provide an explanation? James touched Evelyn's arm gently to calm her. We discovered data that links your ranch to our daughter's disappearance 20 years ago, he said evenly. A practice form found in a restricted area, an item belonging to our daughter Emma, reportedly transferred to your associates at a food establishment, and a vehicle with a CPF logo, Evelyn added. Careway Performance and Fitness, a company that previously supported our daughter's team. Henderson's expression remained calm, but something shifted in his gaze. Perhaps recognition, or perhaps weariness. You've done some digging, he acknowledged, but I'm afraid you've stumbled upon something you don't fully understand. Then explain it to us, Evelyn retorted. Tell us what happened. Henderson sat on the edge of the table, watching them intently. Information has a certain value, Mrs. Miller, and I'm not sure I'm obligated to provide you with the explanations you're looking for. What's the price? Evelyn asked. We're willing to pay. Just tell us where Betsy and Haley are. A slight smile touched Henderson's lips. It's not about money, but since you've learned too much already, I'm left with few options. He stood up and walked to the door, opening it to reveal 3 men waiting outside. Take them to the designated accommodations if they want to see the women, he ordered. Make sure they're comfortable. They'll be staying here for a while. But, sir, are you sure? One of the men asked hesitantly. Yes, he replied coldly. I'll allow this man to make the decision. You can't do this, James protested as the men entered and took them by the arms. People will be looking for us. Law enforcement knows we've been investigating their activities. Law enforcement? Henderson smirked. Don't worry about them. An incident can be arranged in a certain area. A vehicle might run off the road. A fire will occur. Very sad. No one will look for you here. After arguments and protests, Evelyn and James were escorted from the house, across an open yard, to a large structure located nearby. Inside, the structure appeared ordinary. Stalls, storage areas for various materials. But then they were led to what resembled a utility room at the rear of the building. One of the escorts opened a door, revealing a staircase leading down. Go on, he ordered, pushing James forward. They descended the stairs, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. At the bottom was another door, this one made of sturdy material with a complex locking mechanism. The escort entered a code, and the door swung open, revealing a space that resembled an underground bunker. The space was quite large, with concrete walls and floor, lit by fluorescent lights. Along one wall were several beds, a small bathroom separated by a partition, and a small food preparation area in one corner. But Evelyn's attention was immediately drawn to the 3 women sitting on the beds, who watched them warily. The escorts forced Evelyn and James to kneel in the center of the room, securing their hands to a metal structure that ran from floor to ceiling. Then they departed, the heavy door closing behind them with a loud thud that echoed through the silence. For a moment, there was silence as Evelyn and James tried to comprehend what was happening. The women looked to be about the same age, perhaps in their early 30s. They had pale skin, suggesting a lack of sun exposure, but they appeared clean and physically healthy, though their eyes conveyed different feelings. "Who are you?" one of the women finally asked, her voice soft and hesitant. Before either of them could answer, footsteps sounded outside, and the door opened again, admitting Walter Henderson. He surveyed the room with satisfaction. "This is what I meant about the cost of information." He addressed Evelyn and James. "Now you'll have plenty of time to sort things out while you're in this shelter with the others." "With the others," James repeated, his voice slightly trembling. Henderson ignored him, turning to the women. "Ladies, meet your new acquaintances. I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about." He turned toward the door, pausing before exiting. "And don't be making any plans to help them. You remember what happened the last time someone tried that, don't you?" The women visibly tensed, one of them turning away as if to hide her emotions. Henderson exited, the door closing behind him with the sound of multiple locks. As his footsteps faded, Evelyn heard him speaking to someone, his voice rising. "That man," he muttered. "Set up a call to Kenneth Smith and Baker. I hope Baker isn't in contact with law enforcement." The name triggered a memory in Evelyn. Vincent Carraway, the trainer. He was probably involved in everything. As Henderson left, Evelyn turned her attention back to the women, hope and trepidation warring within her. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "help us get free of these ropes." The women exchanged glances. Then one of them stood and approached, turning her back to them. Her thin shirt did little to conceal the marks, perhaps from past injuries. "This is what happens when we don't follow the rules," she explained softly. "If we help you, we'll be treated worse." Evelyn looked at her in horror. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "But please, we're looking for our daughters, Betsy and Haley Miller. They disappeared 20 years ago with their group. Do you know them?" The woman froze, her eyes widening with clear recognition. She slowly turned towards Evelyn, studying her face intently. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dad." Evelyn's heart seemed to stop. Betsy. Haley. The woman who identified herself as Haley swallowed hard, her eyes filling with moisture. "I'm Haley," she confirmed. James, beside Evelyn, made a sound expressing strong emotion, straining against his restraints. "Haley," he repeated, his voice full of emotion. "We found you." Haley paused briefly, then dropped to her knees and began working on the knots that bound their hands, her movements quick but careful. "We need to be quiet," she warned in a whisper. "Sometimes there are people here." As she freed them, Evelyn gazed at her daughter, now a grown woman, her face reflecting the hardships she had endured, but still recognizably the child they had lost. "What happened to you?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Where's Emma?" Haley paused, a look of pain crossing her face. "Only 3 of us survived," she said quietly. "Me, Sophia Wilson, and Hannah Lee." She nodded towards the other 2 women, who were watching the reunion with a mixture of hope and caution. "Ashley died from complications due to health problems a few years ago. They didn't provide the necessary medical care." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, processing what her daughter was telling her. "And Emma?" she asked, although part of her already anticipated the answer. Haley's hands trembled as she continued to work on the knots. "Emma and Olivia died when they tried to organize an escape with the others. It was the last escape attempt. They wanted us to witness it, to teach us a lesson." A sob escaped Evelyn's throat, the pain of realizing her other daughter's death almost unbearable. James wept openly beside her, his shoulders shaking with grief. "I'm so sorry," Haley whispered, finally freeing Evelyn's hands. "I never thought I'd see you again. What are you doing here? How did you find us?" As Haley moved to untie James, Evelyn told her about the suitcase found in the open field, the earring, and how they had followed the employee to the ranch. "The police know we were watching," Evelyn told her daughter. "They'll start searching if we don't come back." Haley shook her head, her face etched with worry. "Mom, if they're as good at covering their tracks as they have been all these years, no one will find us here. This bunker is soundproof. We've called for help many times. No one ever hears us." James, feeling free, embraced Haley. "We won't give up," he promised. "We'll find a way out." Sophia and Hannah cautiously approached, introduced themselves, and Evelyn hugged them both, thinking of their parents who were probably waiting for news. "Your parents never stopped looking for you," she told them. "None of us did." "Who did this?" James asked, his grief turning to determination. "Who took you?" Sophia spoke, her voice sounding more confident than Haley's. "It was Coach Baker. He and his people drugged us after the competition and brought us here. Leafinger owns this place, but Baker is the one who runs things." "And there's another man," Hannah added. "Ramirez. He handles the organization for Baker's company. Everyone thinks he's the owner, but Leafinger is really behind everything. They're just using Ramirez as a cover." Evelyn remembered Detective Miller mentioning that Baker had sold his company 20 years ago. So Baker had lied about selling the company. She realized that he had simply transferred it to Ramirez's name to distance himself from it if anyone suspected anything. Haley nodded. "Baker comes once a month, but the rest of the time we just stay here. No one is allowed to interact with us except him. Not even Leafinger and Ramirez. He says we're his special girls." The horror of their situation became clear as the hours passed. Just as they began to gather their thoughts about escaping, sounds could be heard in the distance, shouts and what sounded like gunshots. Haley hurried to help James find something to signal their presence, settling on a metal tray, which he began to bang against the pipe they were tied to. The noise in the enclosed space was considerable, and they took turns signaling for help. Despite Haley's certainty about the bunker's soundproofing, they decided to try. Several minutes passed that seemed like a long time, and the sounds above seemed to subside. Then, to their surprise, they heard movement on the stairs, followed by voices shouting, "Police! Is anyone down here?" Hope surged through Evelyn as they all shouted back, directing the rescuers to the locked door. After a few tense moments, the electronic lock disengaged, and the door swung open, revealing several police officers in special gear, prepared for any circumstances. One of them held an electronic key, likely obtained from those who had held them captive. "Medical assistance is needed," one of the officers radioed in, assessing the situation. "We have 5 civilians, presumed missing persons, and 2 others." As they were led up the stairs and out of the barn, Evelyn held tightly to Haley's hand, fearing that if she let go, her daughter might disappear again. Outside, the ranch was swarming with police cars and ambulances. Several figures lay on the ground, covered with sheets. Those who had resisted arrest had been subdued by the police. Near the main house, Evelyn spotted Detective Miller coordinating the operation. Standing beside him were Jason Miller and the waitress from the diner, both looking relieved to see Evelyn and James emerge safely. Walter Henderson and 3 other men were being placed in separate police vehicles, handcuffed and heavily guarded. "Detective," Evelyn called out, her voice trembling with emotion. "We found them. We found our daughter Haley, Sophia, and Hannah too. But the others didn't make it." Detective Miller quickly approached, his expression a mixture of shock and relief. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, are you all right? We've been searching for you since the tourist and the waitress reported you missing." "Vincent Baker is behind all of this," James said urgently. "He took the girls 20 years ago. He's been holding them here all this time." The detective's face hardened. "We just finished interviewing Baker at the station a few hours ago," the officer said to a colleague. "Relay to all units. Priority 1. Locate and apprehend Vincent Baker. Handle with extreme caution. Seal off all exits from the town, and execute a search warrant on his residence immediately." As paramedics approached to offer assistance, Evelyn felt a hand on her shoulder. "I know this is difficult, but we need to understand what happened 20 years ago. Are you willing to answer some questions?" Betsy took a deep breath and nodded. "I want to tell you everything. I want him arrested and held accountable for what he did. To my sister." Detective Miller activated a recording device and placed it on the table. "For the record, could you state your full name, please?" "Betsy Michelle Black," she replied, her voice sounding stronger. "I was abducted on May 17th, 1995, along with my twin sister Haley and 4 other girls from our group." "Can you tell us what happened that night?" Amanda closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. "We had just finished competing in the regional championships. We took second place. Everyone was celebrating in the locker room, changing to go home. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. Coach Baker asked Ashley Clark to stay behind to discuss her performance. The rest of us went to the store across the street to get some drinks. When we came back, we entered the room where Coach Baker was talking to Ashley. Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand. As Amanda continued, Ashley looked upset, but the coach kept talking. He said she had a special talent, and that he would help her develop it. When he saw us there, he tried to explain the situation, said Ashley was upset about her performance, and he was trying to comfort her. "What happened next?" Detective Miller asked gently, as Amanda trailed off. "We realized something wasn't right. Olivia Rodriguez said we should tell our parents or the school board. The coach, after exiting the room, returned accompanied by 3 men who were familiar from the ranch. They had medical supplies." The storyteller's voice wavered, and she paused to compose herself. They were injected. She remembered feeling dizzy, then nothing, until waking up in the bunker. All 6 of them were there. Ashley revealed that the coach had been abusing his position for months. She wasn't the only one. He offered some of the girls on the team special training and assistance with their careers if they complied with certain conditions. Some of them agreed, hoping for a professional future. "And after you were taken?" the detective asked. Amanda squeezed her parents' hands tighter. At first, they hoped for a quick rescue. They knew their parents would be looking for them, that the police would be investigating. But days turned into weeks, then months, then years. She recounted how Baker would visit the bunker regularly, selecting one of the girls to assist him during his visits. How Walter Henderson and Kenneth Smith managed the day-to-day operations of their confinement, providing food and necessities, but maintaining their isolation from the outside world. "Ashley got sick about 5 years ago." Amanda continued, her voice flat. "She had infections, high fevers. They begged for medical attention, but it was denied. They gave her medicine, but it wasn't enough. She had passed away there, never seeing her family again." Evelyn wiped away tears. "They were discussing logistics. Logistics channels. I think they were connected to illegal activity." "That would explain the food supplies," James suggested. "Food for the personnel involved in the operation." Detective Miller nodded. "We are thoroughly investigating those aspects. The FBI is already en route. It falls into their jurisdiction with elements of human trafficking and kidnapping." He turned to Betsy. "You mentioned earrings earlier, the ones your mother gave you and Haley for your birthday. Do you know how one of them ended up with a waitress at a diner?" Betsy nodded. "Walter Henderson took them from Haley. I overheard him telling one of the guards that he liked them. Later, I heard him report its relocation back to Phoenix." Evelyn felt a sense of relief. The person involved in the disappearance of their daughters and the events leading to the tragic loss would finally face justice. "It won't bring back what's lost, but it's a start," she said. "There's more," Detective Miller added. The team began examining the grounds. They discovered financial documents linking Baker, Ramirez, and Walter Henderson to alleged illegal activity involving the movement of goods. The ranch being used for fitness activities was just a front. Betsy nodded wearily. "I always suspected something like that. The people who brought the food sometimes talked about deliveries and movements that had nothing to do with us." As they were about to leave for the hospital, the door opened again, and the waitress from the diner appeared, accompanied by a law enforcement officer. She approached hesitantly, her eyes red with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said to Evelyn and James. "If I had known what that detail meant, who those people really were." "You helped save our daughter," Evelyn assured her, rising to embrace the woman. "We can never thank you enough for that." The waitress took an item she had been carrying from her pocket. "It belongs with your family," she said, placing it in Evelyn's palm. "I don't deserve to keep it." Evelyn closed her fingers around the small silver piece, thinking of its connection to Betsy. Such a minor detail had played a crucial role in unraveling a mystery that had persisted for 20 years. "Thank you," she whispered. The law enforcement officer accompanying the waitress spoke up. "A tourist, a Mr. Jason Miller, wanted to convey that he is glad you are safe. He was the one who noticed your absence and alerted us. He and the waitress realized you might have followed her to Ramirez's property and came to the station together." Evelyn made a mental note to thank Jason Miller at the first opportunity. Without his discovery of the luggage and subsequent concern for their safety, they might never have found Betsy. As they left the meeting room, they passed other reunions. Emma with her parents, Sarah and John, expressing their emotions as they embraced the daughter they had been searching for. Sophia with her father, Brian. Her mother, Jennifer, had passed away several years earlier, never knowing her daughter was alive. In the station's main hall, Evelyn noticed Deborah Brooks and the Rodriguezes being informed by police officers that their daughters had not survived. The sound of their grief echoed through the station, serving as a reminder that even in this moment of joy, there was great loss. Betsy paused, looking at them. "I wish I could help," she whispered. "Ashley, Haley, Olivia, they deserve the chance to go home too. You survived," James told her gently. "You helped uncover the truth. Because of you, their stories will be told, and the people responsible will be held accountable." Evelyn hugged her daughter, rejoicing that she was back after so long. The path ahead would not be easy. Betsy and the others would have to navigate their challenges, and the family would have to learn to live with the joy of Betsy's return and the knowledge that Haley was lost. But for now, in this moment, they were together. It was more than Evelyn had dared to hope for when she had awakened that morning to the phone call from Detective Miller. A chapter of their lives that had remained unfinished for so many years was finally coming to a close, giving way to what would come next.